Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's bad idea is the great salad oil swindle of 1963.
I really don't understand what's happening here because I love oil on my salads, and I'm not sure how that's a bad idea, other than possible heart disease later.
It was not the salad oil itself that was the bad idea, at least not in this case. I'm not a doctor or a dietitian, so I'm not here to make recommendations about what to put on your salad. If you're eating a salad, I'm just going to say that generally is awesome. No, today we're going to be talking about a specific person who was involved in the production of one of the components of salad oil, specifically soybean oil, and this man's name was Tino De Angelis. And Tino De Angelis, if you look at him from a certain perspective, he is a classic rags to riches American success story. He starts out from nothing in the Bronx. He borrows like a couple $100 from his dad, invests it in a candy store. It goes bad. He moves into hog processing, and in hog processing, Tino De Angelis finds his calling.
It's always where you find that bacon.
He does. He brings home the bacon quite literally and quite substantially from the hog processing business. He gets into this business and he gets into it big. He starts expanding operations. He's working at a warehouse to begin with. He works his way up. He becomes a manager. He starts his own warehouse. He invents a new way of processing hogs that is, at least according to him, more efficient. We're going to find out that you can't necessarily trust everything that Tino De Angelis has to say about himself or what he's done, but maybe we can trust this one, Tony. Maybe he, in fact, did revolutionize the way hogs were processed and make himself a tidy little fortune on that revolution.
At least he's doing something right so far. We haven't got to this oil idea yet, or this salad idea. I'm not sure which.
Salad oil, yes. Soybean oil is where we're going, but right now we're with the hogs, Tony. And the hogs are where Tino De Angelis first runs into trouble. You see, Tino finds out that there is a government program that buys up hog meat and packages it for school children to have in their lunches. And Tino De Angelis says, yes, I would like to get in on this. I will send kids some of my hogs to eat for lunch. And so he starts sending off his lunch meat to be a part of this government program. Except there's a little problem where he doesn't have the meat inspected at all. And of course, when he's confronted with this, Tino has an excuse. He says, well, listen, those government inspectors, they're actually reducing the quality of the pork. I am making sure that these school children are getting amazing good pork at getting around that bad inspector man.
He's got to be one of those sovereign citizen type guys. It's like, I'm using my method of transportation. I'm not driving a car.
No. Tino's way subtler than this. He's just cult of personality kind of manipulation. He doesn't have any magic hoodoo law nonsense. He just thinks if he can sell you on himself hard enough, he can win eventually, no matter what he does.
Like sociopaths.
I would say that's very likely. So in response to him selling them bad meat, the government fines Tito's organization, and the fine is so large that essentially they have to go into bankruptcy. Oof. And in the process of investigating this claim, they're looking into Tino's business, and someone in the business says to them, hey, by the way, Tino is tapping into this lard that he says he has on hand and borrowing against it, but he's making up inventory. He's actually inventing the idea of lard in barrels that does not exist, borrowing money against this, and the bank doesn't know about it, and the government says, ooh, that's great, we have a case, let's go, until Tino finds out about it, and, you know, this guy finds out that he actually misremembered his story, and there was lard in all those barrels, Tony. So that case falls apart. And it's a really shame when people have just a bad memory like that.
Yeah, it's like Iran-Contra. Plausible deniability and so on.
So you have this man coming off of major investigations that just barely didn't happen. He was not able to be prosecuted, but it's pretty much public record that he's got some problems. His company's bankrupt, and he decides, you know what the time is? I'm going to move away from hogs exclusively. He still keeps a reasonable share in his hog company, but he says, I'm going to expand into bigger and better things. And Tino De Angelis puts his sights on the soybean oil market. Now, the reason that he does this is because he knows something about this market that maybe a lot of other people who aren't as shrewd as him would figure out.
Is it that eventually tofu's going to sell for more per pound than beef?
No, he does not know this. He just knows that there has been a bumper crop of soybeans. There has been more soybeans produced than probably many people are going to want to buy. And what happens when you have more than enough crop?
Prices drop.
Oh, no, but see, if prices drop, if the market does its thing, that's bad for farmers. You can't have things be bad for farmers because then your political opponent, if you're the president or a senator, says, he voted against farmers, and everybody loves a good farmer. So instead of letting the price drop, at least substantially, what the government does instead is they buy up all of these soybeans and they send them to other countries. This is called the Food for Peace program, and it's relatively convoluted because as much as people don't like farmers going out of business because the government didn't do anything, they also super don't like the government using your taxpayer money to buy crops that nobody else was going to buy and then giving it away to some country that you might not like. So what happens is, to cover themselves politically, is that the Food for Peace program is like several layers deep. Instead of just giving the food away, the government gives it to companies to sell to other countries and then doesn't actually take their money, or takes their money but then just turns around and spends it back into the local economy again. They obfuscate this thing out the wazoo, but what Tino realizes is, in essence, lots of soybeans means government pays me to send soybean oil overseas. And he makes this work. He takes this bumper crop of soybeans and he buys soybean oil at a ridiculous rate and sells it at a ridiculous rate. And this is something that raises a lot of questions about Tino De Angelis initially. He is actually offering higher prices than anyone else and selling for lower than anyone else. And there is, early in his career, a whiff of a conspiracy that maybe Tino De Angelis is actually some kind of a mob front, that he is, in fact, being used as a money laundering scheme, and the selling of the oil is not profitable because the people who are behind him don't care if it's profitable. They're going to make their money anyway. There is no confirmation on that. I didn't find confirmation or denial on that half of stuff, so that's just something that people were suspicious of in the beginning. But they're not suspicious enough to stop selling their soybeans at ridiculously high prices and or buying soybean oil at ridiculously low prices.
Yeah, so long as the cash is in hand, I wouldn't be worried about it either as a farmer. It's like, if I can profit off the mafia while not getting in their way in any sort of way, that's not the worst thing in the world.
Well, mafia connections aside, because we do not know anything about that, what we do know for sure is that Tino wants to expand. You're gonna see him as a shyster in this story, and you're gonna think, well, maybe the salad oil thing was really all just kind of a ploy. But no, I think from the reading that I've done on this, that Tino De Angelis, for all of his other cons that he runs, actually does see himself as a soybean oil tycoon. He wants to be the king of soybean oil, and for that he needs to expand. He needs to expand his holding capacity in his warehouse, and so he needs to borrow money. But he's the kind of guy who has been bankrupt, who has had many fishy things in his past, who has alleged mafia connections. There are many things about this man that might make an upstanding banker say, no, you already ran one company into bankruptcy and we're not doing this.
Can you remind me of the time period for this?
This is late 50s, early 60s. The salad oil stuff specifically is going to be from around 1960 to 1963.
For some reason, I thought this was like Charles Ponzi era or something like that, a little earlier in history.
Well, as a spoiler for the very, very end of this story, after he does all of this, he also gets involved in a Ponzi scheme with hogs.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
But that's really just an incidental at the end of his life. The real buck wild story is still to unfold, Tony. In order to get the loans that he needs to expand his operation, Tino approaches American Express. Now, American Express, we all know, it's a big name. They are a credit card company, but they also, at this time, were expanding into other regions and other potential areas of business. And one of the things they thought could have been profitable was a service that they could offer where they would certify the contents of a warehouse for the purposes of bank loans and financial statements and those kinds of things. American Express would come to your warehouse, they would put their name behind the official tally of what you had, and you could take that to the bank, literally. Except, this business was not going well. For whatever reason, it just wasn't as lucrative as they thought it was going to be, and this particular branch of their business is about to go under because nothing is profitable. There is no money rolling in. None of these ventures are actually working out. And the man in charge of this division of American Express is named Donald Miller. And Donald Miller knows he's about to lose his job. He knows that his division of this company is about to be liquidated. He will no longer be working here, and it's probably a pretty nice job. He's the sub-CEO essentially of whatever's going on in this. So he has a vested interest in keeping this going, but for the life of him, he cannot make this business work. And then one fine morning, into his office strolls a smiling, affable Tino De Angelis. And Tino De Angelis tells him about a problem that he has. He says, "Man, I got all this oil. I'm amazing at salad oil. You would not believe the volume that I am doing, and you super wouldn't believe the volume that I could be doing if only I had someone who would just stand up for me with the banks." Now, I see here that you have this operation where you certify all of these warehouses, and you are exactly the kind of man that I need. I need somebody upstanding. Yeah, I mean, I'm upstanding too, but I realized about these bankruptcies, but it was just ticky-tacky stuff with the government and regulations. You know how that is, right? Man, government regulations suck. Anyway, why don't you just, send your investigators by and you can write these certifications. They were called receipts at the time. For how much oil I have in my tanks. You guys can check it out to your heart's content. Look, I've all these giant tanks. I definitely have oil in all of them. And I will use these to borrow money off of. And you'll get your fee, and that'll be great. And so Miller, seeing a lifeline, seeing a potential for business going on, as usual, says, "Yeah, sure, we'll send somebody by." And the man he sends by is named Fred Turner. Now, I have a quote that Miller gave about Fred Turner and how good he was at being an investigator. He said that Turner could, quote, "smell if anything was wrong just by walking into a place and looking around." But it turns out that that was basically all that Fred Turner ever did when he was investigating a place, because after everything is said and done, Miller said, quote, "No actual physical inventories are ever taken at the greater number of the warehouses called on."
So they didn't do the job? What happened?
Listen, it's a lot of work to go and count all the stuff that people say they have to count. These are fine, upstanding businesses. And you can't just go around not trusting them to tell you how much they have on hand and actually go and physically count it one thing at a time.
When that's your actual business, like the only part of your business, yeah, you totally can't have them doing that.
It turns out that laziness is a powerful force.
He can smell if anything's wrong, and he can smell if your inventory's there, and that's all he needs.
But even at this early stage, there are indications that things are not quite on the up and up at Allied Crude Vegetable Oil Refining Corporation in Bayonne, New Jersey. There are reports that there is water in some of this oil. Now, there is a reasonable explanation for that. These are giant, giant tanks. Some of them have small holes at the top where maybe some rainwater can get in. Maybe there's condensation. It's certainly not as pure as you would want it to be, but when Miller talks to Allied about this problem, they say, oh yeah, no, actually that's really serious. We're going to look into that. We're going to solve that problem. And Miller thinks, okay, well, we're both together in this. We all want for this to be on the up and up. Obviously, Allied would want to know if there wasn't the amount of oil that they thought they had in their tanks. Let's all solve this problem together. These nice men in lab coats that I'm going to assume are scientists who work for Tino De Angelis have told me that they're definitely on the case, and that's enough for me. And then Miller started getting phone calls in the middle of the night. And these phone calls were from an anonymous source that said, hey, man, this place is not what you think it is. There are people here who are installing trapdoors and gimmicks in these tanks to make the inspectors think that there is way more oil than there actually is. They're installing pipes that go down from the sampling section from the bottom of the tank to the top. So when you drop in your little dropper that tests the oil, it goes all the way to the bottom and gets oil. But around that, that's a lot of salt water. And some of them aren't even that good. Some of them just have salad oil floating on the top of a bunch of salt water. You should probably look into it. And Miller goes to his very good friend, Tino De Angelis, and says, I've heard terrible things about your warehouse. And Tino De Angelis says, oh my goodness, we must look into it. I will look into it right now. And Miller assumes that everything's good because Tino De Angelis is a fine, upstanding businessman and he is looking into it. And in addition to that, he is also continuing to pay for this service that no one else is really wanting to pay for. And is in fact the only profitable account on Mr. Miller's books.
I guess that makes sense why they wouldn't be looking very deep into him. You don't want to offend the person that's giving you money, even if that is your business.
That is definitely one of the problems here. And we'll get into more of this because Tino, he is swindling everyone around him. And yet, personally, he is making sure that they are well compensated. The people who are buying oil from him are getting it at a great price. The people who are selling oil to him are getting a great price. And the banks that he is borrowing money from are getting lots and lots of interest.
I mean, that's one of the main rules of power whenever you're looking at it. You have to be able to exchange enough clout, enough currency, enough whatever, so that you get these people completely loyal to you. So he's done a good job at building that network, if nothing else.
Yes, he also specifically tries to make sure that the people who he's on a face-to-face basis with trust him. He does things to build up his character in the eyes of these people. And I don't have specifics in my notes here, but I highly recommend the book that I read to compile this episode, which is The Great Salad Oil Swindle. It is basically out of print and very difficult to find at the moment, but you can borrow a copy from archive.org, which is what I did to research this episode, and it is fascinating reading. I mean, not just in the, there's lots of information in here. I mean, it is a fascinating story. And so Tino is borrowing like there's no tomorrow, and the banks love it. Because on the one side, like I mentioned, he's paying high interest rates, and on the other side, there's no risk because American Express, whose name everyone has heard and trusts, is backing his warehouse. There's no way that anything is going to go wrong. And so they just keep shoveling money at him, and Tino keeps paying that interest and making him happy. And then Tino gets into speculation. It turns out that, as you may have already suspected, Tino did not have as much oil at his warehouse as he said that he did. when he claimed that he had 1.8 billion pounds of soybean oil, and the entire United States production of soybean oil in that year was only 2 billion pounds. It turns out that that was a lie.
Just a little bit.
But he does still have business to do. He does still have people who want to buy his oil. And he has a deal with Spain, where Spain is going to buy a bunch of oil. More oil than he actually has on hand. And so he needs to come up with a source of extra oil. And he starts buying into oil futures. Now, a future, for those of you who aren't into the investing thing, and I am not, I will try not to make this boring, but it's important so you understand it, is a thing that you can buy so that you can purchase something in the future for a specific price. Like, for instance, if you wanted to buy a future on flour, and you said, in 1 year, I want to be able to buy flour for $10 a pound. And it's expensive flour, but you could reach an agreement with somebody and say, listen, no matter what happens in the market, you will definitely sell me your flour for $10 a pound. And it's a good idea if you're a business and you want to lock in prices, right? Like you've got a manufacturing concern of some kind and you don't want to be dealing with the market wobbling up and down. You can use one of these futures deals to lock in a price with a supplier. And if the price goes way down, then you're paying more than what it would be available for. But if the price goes way up, then you're not on the hook for the huge increase. So it just gives everybody a little stability.
Yeah, like at this current time, you're seeing a lot of people buying oil futures, gasoline futures for their businesses and just hoping that the company that they're buying from doesn't go out because you can get it dirt cheap right now.
Even including one day when it was negative. Because what happens is many people who buy these futures don't actually want to own any oil. And if you're holding the oil future at the time when the oil futures contract comes due, you have to take delivery of some actual oil. And many people who buy these futures are actually speculating. They are just betting on whether the price will go up or down, and futures are the mechanism that they use to do it. And the thing about a future is you don't have to pay the full price of the thing ahead of time. You don't have to pay the $10 for the pound of flour a whole year in advance. You just put some money down so that the person who's going to sell you the future knows, okay, well, they're serious. And so what Tino does is he buys into these salad oil futures so that he will be able to collect this oil. And at the last second, Spain backs out of the deal. Spain says, you know what? We're actually not going to buy your oil. And there's a whole, like, extra level of conspiracy theory where Tino blames the Opus Dei for coming into the situation and manipulating the Spanish government. And there's also some Spanish unions that he says get in on the deal. And I don't know if that's just stuff that he made up, because there's a lot of stuff he makes up when things go bad so that it won't be his fault.
Once again, sociopathic tendencies to blame everything but himself, but maybe there's a little bit this time.
I super want for Opus Dei to be part of the story in addition to everything else that's going on.
Explain Opus Dei to people who haven't heard of it.
It's like the Catholic Mafia, I think. It was in the Da Vinci Code. I don't even know, Tony. I didn't study that part.
It's okay.
Now, at this point, Tino is not sunk. He has these oil futures, but he can sell them off. He will lose some money, but it will probably be okay if he just backs off. But there's something about this guy that is not capable of letting go of something once he's started it. And so rather than sell off the oil and accept that he's had this loss, he doubles down. He starts buying more oil futures. Because if he buys more oil futures, the value of this oil, this salad oil, will go up. And he owns a lot of salad oil, and he says he owns a lot more salad oil than he actually owns. So if he can inflate the price, all of a sudden he'll have even more fake oil that he can borrow money against, because now it will be worth even more money.
So he's trying to fix the market, basically.
He's trying to corner the market. Tino's dream is that eventually he will own all of the salad oil, and he can set whatever price he wants. He is going to corner the market. There will be no competition, and he will be the ultimate salad oil king. And he keeps buying futures and keeps buying futures. And the firm that he buys futures from is IRA Hopped and Company. And Ira Hopt and Company, once again, are doing great with Tino. Every single time Tino comes in or his people come in to buy oil futures, they make $30 a commission. And he buys lots and lots of oil futures, which means lots and lots of commissions over and over for them. There is nothing wrong with Tino. As far as they can tell, this man is great for business. Let's keep helping him buy more oil futures. Oh, he needs a loan. Tino needs a loan so he can buy more oil futures. And Hopt says, well, sure, yeah, we'll give you a loan from our money.
Yeah, let's just gamble with other people's money.
Yes, but, I mean, he's good for it, Tony, because he has these American Express receipts that definitely are for real oil.
Yeah, they inspected it and everything.
Except, at this point in the story, American Express had started to suspect, okay, wait a minute, maybe this isn't so great. Let's back off a little bit. Let's stop writing as many receipts as we were writing for this guy, because we might be a little overextended here. I mean, how are they going to collect on all this oil if Tino happens to have a bad month or something? They don't know how to sell off a bunch of oil, so... And it definitely is there, but still, it's going to be a lot of work for them to have to recoup all that. So they back off, but what they don't know is that Tino has somehow come into possession of the checkbook. He has gotten a pad of American Express blank receipts, and he is filling them out on his own and forging the signatures of American Express's top executives.
So now it's just full-on fraud. It's not even just kind of messing with numbers and cutting a little off the corners. It's just taking now.
It's just stealing straight from American Express. He also, I don't have all the details in the notes on this, but he's also running check kiting schemes where he's in business with another company and he pays their accountant not to cash his checks because he doesn't want the checks to be cashed because he doesn't have that much money in accounts. He is bouncing everything all over the place. He is juggling all of the balls. And all of a sudden, he drops one. The Council of Economic Advisors starts looking into Tino's futures trading. They say, this is weird. This guy is just buying futures for no reason. Like, there was that rumor that maybe Russia was going to buy a bunch of soybeans, but that didn't materialize, and he's just inflating the market. He's just manipulating. That's all he's doing. We need to go and look at his books. And they walk into Tino's office, and they say, hey, show us the books. And Tino freaks out. Not visibly, because Tino is always 100% cool. But he stalls them and calls up his accountant and says, make up some books. Give us something to give these guys, because we are in deep trouble if we give them the real books. And the accountant pulls in everybody that he has, and he's yelling at Tino because he didn't hire more help for him, and he's trying to get all this done in a weekend while Tino stalls the people who are asking for the books. And while he's doing this, he has to stop trading oil futures. And as soon as Tino stops buying oil futures, the price goes down. And when the price on a future goes down, the person who holds the future has to pay the difference. So if your $10 bag of flour is now worth $8, but you have the future for $10, you have to pay the whole $2 difference, even if you only paid 25 cents to secure the future in the first place. This is called leverage. And if I didn't explain it that well, it's because I am not a financial guru. It's relatively complicated, but what it ends up meaning is that Tino overnight is in the hole like $13 million.
Oof.
And Tino doesn't have the money to cover $13 million worth of down. But he has a lot of oil. For sure. He definitely has so much oil in those tanks. And so his good friends at the Hopt investment firm say, well, we got you, bud. We're going to cover this for you. Obviously, you're going to pay us back. I mean, this is not cool, but we're going to pay you back. We don't actually have the cash on hand either, so we're going to borrow the money to pay back all of these futures that have now depreciated. And the collateral that we have, it turns out that that is the stock that other people have invested with us and the deposits that people have put in our banks. So that's how we're going to pay this off. And Hopped borrows against the people who've invested in their firm. It's as if Merrill Lynch was to take out a loan based on the money that you had invested through them in your whatever stock that they were holding on to. They used that as collateral to cover these short prices that are now coming in because Tino is being investigated.
It's like 40 levels of people borrowing from each other just to get like a few things paid off that don't even exist.
And as you can imagine, the house of cards starts to come crumbling down. Hopped, all of a sudden, cannot trade on the stock exchange floor because they do not have enough assets to cover their trades. There's a 1/20th rule, I think, that you have to have 1/20th of the money on hand to cover the trades that you're going to make, and they don't even have that. And suddenly, Wall Street freaks out. The people who are in charge of the stock exchange on Wall Street, they say, you did what? Who? Tino De Angelis? Salad oil? What is going on? And they start looking into this, and they're like, you guys don't have the money, and you've like borrowed against your investors, and this is going to ruin us. Because if people start to think, Tony, that maybe the investment firm that they're invested with would borrow against the money that they put in there that they think is their money, and they could just lose all that, suddenly nobody's going to invest in any firm in the stock market.
Yeah, that confidence is pretty important.
And they call an emergency meeting. They are all about, like, let's damage control. And at this moment, when the damage control has to come in and Wall Street is about to collapse under the weight of the salad oil swindle, more news hits the wires. Completely unrelated to anything else in this story. It just so happens that this day, when the salad oil swindle really started to collapse, is also the date of the assassination of President Kennedy.
That's a good way to bury a headline, I guess.
I mean, put Tino De Angelis on the list of people who might have had a hand in it, right? Oh boy, I don't want the heat on me. Let's kill the president. That'll get him for a while. Now, in a sense, and I mean a very twisted sense, this is actually kind of good news. Since this happens on a Friday, Wall Street has the whole weekend and an extra day on Monday that they are closed to honor the death of the president to figure out what they're going to do. And Wall Street collectively, all of the brokerage firms that make up Wall Street, collectively bail out Hopped to the tune of $12 million. Now, conditionally, basically Hopped is disintegrated, right? The people who were in charge are no longer in charge, and a lot of them didn't even know about this. Most of the people who were doing really stupid stuff were the sort of middle management at the company. There were people who were running the firm, in essence, who were looking around after this trying to figure out what had happened because they barely knew who this De Angelis guy was. But they lost all their money anyway because, well, let's call it poor leadership, Tony. Still got to take responsibility.
Yeah. I think that is a very, very clear thing here.
Now, naturally, the stock market plummets, and obviously we can't blame it all on the salad oil, Tony. But it does come back, and Tino De Angelis eventually spends 7 years in prison. When he gets out, he does that pyramid scheme I said with the hogs earlier. I couldn't find nearly as much info on that, probably because it wasn't nearly as interesting. And then, as far as I can tell, he gives up on the large-scale swindling career and retires into obscurity until he dies in 2009.
He lived a bit later than I thought.
Yeah, he made it. And that is almost all of the story of the great salad oil swindle. One of the most amazing stories that I had never heard of, Tony. Sometimes we get to go in depth on a story that people have heard and tell them details they might not have known. But this was one where I just straight up wasn't aware of it until like last week.
Yeah, I had never heard of any of this. This was completely new to me.
Once I got to the end, I understood why. I thought, oh, okay, President Kennedy. Like, nothing was ever going to overshadow that. This story would have been huge if it hadn't been for that event. But because that all broke at exactly the same time, I think this just got buried. And it's a shame because it's a fascinating story. And it really tells you a lot about how financial instruments are very, very disconnected from the actual physical thing that they supposedly represent. Most people who are trading in oil do not care anything about physical oil. When the housing market collapsed, a lot of it had to do with the fact that the people who were buying into the housing market didn't really care about houses themselves. And yet, ultimately, those physical, tangible assets are what is at the bottom of these financial dealings. There is a certain amount of psychology. There's the up and down of, well, I feel good and I feel bad. But in the end, what you're trading on is a real physical thing. And the further you get divorced from that, the worse it comes back to bite you. There is a silver lining to this story, Tony, if you want to call it that. Might not be if you want for all of the financial people to just end up being awful and rotten and failing miserably. There's a young investor at this time who sees the fallout from this. And in the fallout of this scandal, American Express stock loses 50% of its value, approximately. And this investor takes a look at that and he says, I'm pretty sure American Express is still a good company. Like, yeah, that one division was kind of crummy and they're probably going to be paying that back for a while, but their fundamentals are sound. I'm going to get in on this. And he buys 5% of American Express stock on a 50% fire sale. And that man's name was Albert Einstein. I mean, Warren Buffett.
I was going to say, I didn't know Einstein ended up bankrolling that hard.
This episode has gone long, Tony. I sure hope that you guys enjoyed it. It was so difficult to know what details to leave in and leave out. And I highly recommend the book, The Salad Oil Swindle. If you have not heard of this at all, boy, are there some details in there that are just even more than what I could get to. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about this as much as I enjoyed researching it. I'm sorry that I am not a great financial explainer. I feel like I failed on helping people to understand some of this stuff if they did not understand it already. But
look, we can't do The Big Short and have Margot Robbie in a bathtub explaining these things. It's not in our budget.
Yeah, we blew it all on that salad dressing, Tony. I said we should go with ranch, but you were like, no, Italian oil is the way to go.
I have so much more trust in the Italians.
We get it straight from Joe's hair, though.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys next week.
Have a good one, everybody.